This will be over absolute value equations. So if we have absolute value of x equals 5, what values of x could make this true? Well, we can say x equals 5 or x equals negative 5. So whether you put 5 or negative 5 in, this will hold true. The other reason why we have a positive x and a negative x, if we look at the graph, absolute value of x equals y, the graph of this is actually two parts. We have this part here, which is the x equals y. So whatever x is here, so if we have x is 1, then y is 1. X is 5, y is 5. And then the other half, we actually have a v for absolute value. That's how we remember the graph. The other equation would be negative x equals y, where we have negative 1 equals 1, negative 5 equals 5. So we have these two individual equations that make up the whole graph. So to solve absolute value equations, you're going to write the equation without the absolute value and then write it again, but you negate the right side. You negate your number. And then we'll look at some different ones, some odd equations on these. So let's start out with absolute value of 4 plus 7x equals 4. So we have an absolute value equaling 4. In this case, we can say, well, the 4 plus 7x, if we replace that with a 4, absolute value of 4 is 4. If we replace it with a negative 4, instead of this 4 plus negative 7, if we say, well, that's negative 4, absolute value of negative 4 is 4. So when we solve absolute value equations and inequalities, we have two equations to solve for. Okay? If you do not solve for the other equation, you are not going to get all of your points. It's almost like you're missing half of the problem. So let's go ahead and solve. So all across the board, we can subtract 4, and you can work on these two one at a time or all together. It doesn't matter. So x equals 0 and negative 8 over 7. So whether we put 0 in for x or negative 8/7 for x, we will get the absolute value of 4 or negative 4, which would equal a positive 4. This is very important. We cannot distribute that negative 9 through with the absolute value. Absolute values are not the same thing as parentheses. So we have to isolate the absolute value. So absolute value of x minus 7 equals positive 2. We have an absolute value equaling a number. So inside, where the x minus 7 can equal 2, or x minus 7 can equal negative 2. Add 7 to both of those. X equals 9 and x equals 5. So no matter if you put a 9 or a 5 in there, you will get a positive 2, which then in turn you'll be multiplying by negative 9, which will equal the negative 18. Six plus the absolute value of 4x plus 2 equals 20. Again, we cannot set this up yet because our absolute value is not isolated. You have to isolate that absolute value. So absolute value of 4x plus 2 equals 14. Now we have absolute value equaling a value or a number. So write it as is, and then write again without the parentheses, or not parentheses, without the absolute value, and then you get your number. 4x equals 12, and 4x equals negative 16. So x will equal 3 and negative 4 when you divide by 4. Now there's some special cases. For instance, negative 9 minus 8 times absolute value of r minus 5 equals 25. And you're going to add the 9 over, and all we're doing is isolating the absolute value. So that would be 34. No, not, yeah, 34. Sorry. Oh, no, sorry. That's supposed to be a positive 9, not a negative 9. I was going to say this should work itself out. So that should be 16, and then you divide by negative 8. So absolute value of r minus 5 equals negative 2. Hold on, there's a red flag. A absolute value equaling a negative value. Anytime you have an absolute value equaling a negative value, you need to use some logical skills and say, wait a minute, I don't think this is right, and we're going to think of all of this as a positive and negative sense. So absolute value is always positive. No matter what number you take the absolute value of, it is always positive. Negative 2 is negative. Well, positive equaling a negative number, that never works, so we have a no solution here. So when you solve absolute value equations, make sure you isolate the absolute value. And then you solve for two equations. Okay, the two equations are what's inside the absolute value equaling the positive, and whatever's in the absolute value equaling a negative. Anytime you have absolute value equaling a negative value, stop and assess what you have, and you may have a no solution. This concludes our video.